जी वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह। अज अपना US कांग्रेस विच जेनोसाइड दे विच ब्रीफिंग होने लगी है जिहड़े कि कांग्रेसमैन जॉन गैरमडी, पैट्रिक मीहन एंड जिम कास्टा ने होस्ट ने। इत्थे स्पैशल मीटिंग बुलाई गई जेनोसाइड से जिहदे च अडामा डिएंग अंडर सैकटरी यूनाइटेड नेशन दे जिहड़े कि आल्सो हैड ऑफ द यूनाइटेड नेशन स्पैशल एडवाइजर ऑन प्रिवेंशन ऑफ जेनोसाइड बोलणगे। उस तो अलावा डॉक्टर चीमा जिहड़े कि 3 केस पॉइंट से बोलणगे जेनोसाइड्स जिहड़े कि बर्मीज अगेंस्ट यजीदीज सीरिया और इराक से एंड ऑफ कोर्स सिखां का जिहड़ा जेनोसाइड होया सी जिहड़ी कि कॉन्फ्रेंस जिहड़ी हो रही है ब्रीफिंग ये इनलाइटन करना चाहती है कि मैंबर्स ऑफ कांग्रेस नूं जिहड़े कि जिहड़े अंडर सैकटरी बोलणगे कि जेनोसाइड की क्लासिफिकेशन की है अंडर द यूनाइटेड नेशन जिहड़े केस प्रजेंट किए जाएंगे वो दसूगा कि हाँ ये अप्लाई कर दे कि इन दूजे मिनोरिटीज से कि नहीं। सो इस तो बाद जिहड़े कि हाउस वाले पासों जिहड़े कि होर भी मैंबर्स वो उस तो विचार करेंगे कि हाँ ये कितों फॉलो थ्रू करना। कई सोचते हैं कि जिहड़े कि स्पैशल मीटिंग्स और जुडिशरी काउंसिल बनाया जाए जिहड़े कि इन्हों देखा जाए। ये हुण देखांगे कि US कांग्रेस किहड़े पासे लैके जाती है। पर मोस्ट इंपोर्टेंट हैगा इस इशू जेनोसाइड एंड किहड़े होर मिनोरिटीज से जिहड़े अफेक्टेड हुए ने जेनोसाइड से ये अज विचार की जाऊगी।
हरप्रीत सिंह संधू जी जिवें सिख कौम की जे असीं गल करिए तां असीं जेनोसाइड नूं रिकोगनाइज करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं एट द इंटरनेशनल लैवल। सो ये मीटिंग उस स्टैप दे विच कितनी क सहाई हो सकती है?
एब्सोल्युटली इस सिस्टम च आपां नूं होना पैना। दिस इज द फर्स्ट स्टैप मूविंग इन दैट डायरैक्शन जिहड़े कि जेनोसाइड दे अपने ही UN दे जो डायरैक्टर ने वो भी सुनणगे एंड डिस्कशन वालों सिखा दी। पर आई लाइक टू ऑल्सो मेक श्योर कि जी आप अंडरस्टैंडिंग है जेनोसाइड जो इंडिया होया जी कि इस वे गवर्नमेंट ने भी आप कई 2-3 फरकतां वाली स्टेटमेंट दित्तियां कि सिखां के खिलाफ ही जेनोसाइड होया जी कि मोदी साहब ने आप कहा कि हाँ जेनोसाइड हुई है जो इलैक्शंस 2013 रन कर रहे थे। सो इट इज़ नॉट कि इंडिया नहीं एक्सेप्ट करता। द करंट गवर्नमेंट हैज़ ऑन इन द प्रेस स्टेटेड के होया। नाउ इट्स द प्रोसेस के कितने जाना। गवर्नमेंट आई सी उन्होंने कमिशनां बिठाइया सी कि उन्होंने वायदा किया सी कि जेनोसाइड जो होया दिल्ली च देखा जाऊगा सानू 6 महीने दो। फिर साल हो गया अगे बढ़ाया। सो दैट कंटिन्यूज टू हैपन एंड वह कितने पहुंचूगा नतीजा इट्स अनफॉर्चुनेट कि वो गवर्नमेंट सीरियसली नहीं ले रही। ऑन द इंटरनेशनल लैवल से जो अज मीटिंग होगी ये डेफिनेटली विल मूव फॉरवर्ड इन द डायरैक्शन कि UN कि जानगे कि ये जेनोसाइड सिखाता है और दूजे भी मिनोरिटीज से जोड़े कि केसेस हो सकते हैं जिसे जेनोसाइड होया है।
हाँ जी वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह। अज जी इत्थे ब्रीफिंग हो रही है US कांग्रेस के विच जेनोसाइड के उपर असीं पार्टिसिपेट करना है इत्थे। मैं समझदा कि बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट स्टैप साडे वास्ते भी और ओवरऑल ही क्योंकि दुनिया के जिस किस्म के हालात बने हुए हैं कि जेनोसाइड आने वाले समय दे विच ना होण, हाउ टू प्रिवेंट इट। सो आई थिंक दैट्स द मेन इशू। पर इहदे नाल ही सिख कौम के परसपैक्टिव तो जिहड़ा साडे नाल जेनोसाइड होया है 1984 दे विच ਉਹਦੇ बारे भी जिहड़ी गलबात है वो की जाऊगी और आने वाले समय दे विच की ਉਹਦੀ ਰੈਮਡੀਜ਼ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੌਮੀ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਸੋਚਣ ਦੀ ਵਿਚਾਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ ਕਿ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਤੋਂ ਸੇਧ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੇ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਦਾ ਬਚਾਅ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ। ਔਰ ਸੈਕੰਡਲੀ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਹੋਇਆ ਆ ਉਹਦਾ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਸਟੇਟ ਆ ਉਹ ਜਵਾਬਦੇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਵਾਬਦੇਹ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਡਿਮਾਂਡਸ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। सो ये ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਔਰ मेरे ख्याल से ਇਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਵਿਦਨ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵੀ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ।
Today's briefing is very important both for Indian and international standards because as Navy speakers are in, especially the person from UN is coming and talking about that how genocide, UN the definition is that genocide doesn't mean that the death should happen in large numbers but the intent of the oppressor. So je focus usde hisab naal usde hue then whatever happened in both June and November 84 is genocide, and to justify and to actually go forward and have an outside person to talk about what Sikhs have been fighting for past over 30 years is a very big achievement. So this is the expectation out of the briefing, is that our narrative is echoed by UN organization and the speakers of international scholars. At the same time, organization like Voices for Freedom is an international human rights organization. So they are like right now when people are arrested back in India, including Resham Singh Ji for Sabha Khalsa. So anybody who's talking about freedom and independence, what persecution they are even facing after 13 years is the narrative which will add on to the continuous session of genocide which is happening in India.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Mera naam Karandeep Singh and I'm a student from San Jose State University and I'm a representative of the Sikh Student Association at San Jose State. I'm here today at this event which recognizes genocide not only with Sikhs but also with the Burmese and the Yazidis. I think events like these are important because they shed light upon the injustices that have been done and further prevent atrocities like these to be committed in the future. So ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੰਗੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਰੈਕਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਰੈਕਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਾੜਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਫਿਊਚਰ 'ਚ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨਾ ਹੋਣ. And it's good to see community leaders get together under one banner and shed light upon this event, which has a lot of significance amongst the minorities throughout the world. So I think overall it's a really great initiative, and I'm glad that I'm here to be a part of this.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. ਮੈਂ ਬਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਚੱਠਾ ਵਰਜੀਨੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਅੱਜ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਹਿਲ ਤੇ ਆਏ ਹਾਂ. ਰੇਬਰਨ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਥੇ ਅੱਜ ਹੀਰਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ. ਹਾਊ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੀਵੈਂਟ in 20th century the genocide. So congressional Sikh caucus ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਹ ਹੀਰਿੰਗ ਰੱਖੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ. ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਝ ਬੁਲਾਰੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਹੈ. ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਦਾ ਸਮਰਥਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ 1984 ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ ਅਸੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਰੈਕੋਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਏ ਅਤੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਤੋਂ ਸੰਸਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੇ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ. ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਔਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਫੋਰ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਿੱਖ ਔਰ ਜੋ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਹੈ ਉਹਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੀਰਿੰਗ ਰੱਖੀ ਹੈ. ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਵਧਾਈ ਦੇ ਪਾਤਰ ਹਨ. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.
ਪ੍ਰਬੰਧਕ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਵਿਸ਼ੇਸ਼ ਦਿਨ ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਦੋ ਮੇਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਚੇਅਰਮੈਨ ਜੌਨ ਗਰਮੈਂਡੀ ਅਤੇ ਪੈਟਮੀ ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਬੜੇ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਜਿਮ ਕੋਸਟਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਆ ਉਹ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਤੋਂ ਡਿਪਟੀ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਅੰਡਰ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਅੰਤਰਰਾਸ਼ਟਰੀ ਮਾਮਲਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਚੀਮਾ ਉਹ ਭਾਗ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਮੋਡਰੇਟ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਹੀ ਇੱਕ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਸੱਚ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਏਗੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਵਿਸ਼ੇਸ਼ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਅਤੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਨਸਲਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਲੰਬੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਪੀਰੀਅਡ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੰਬੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਨਸਲਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਰਿਕਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਹੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੱਢਣ ਦਾ ਤਰੀਕਾ ਬਣਾਇਆ. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਰੇਬਰਨ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗ 'ਚ ਉਸ ਕਮਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਠੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਕੁਝ ਮਿੰਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ 21st ਸੈਂਚੁਰੀ 'ਚ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵਿਸ਼ੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ. ਅਸੀਂ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਾਕਸ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੁਕਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਐਫਰਟ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ ਫੀਲਡ ਦੇ ਖਾਸ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਪੈਨਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਣਗੇ ਔਰ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਾਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਮੰਜ਼ਿਲ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਛੋਟੇ ਛੋਟੇ ਬੇਬੀ ਸਟੈਪ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹੋ. ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਕਸ ਦਾ ਹੋਂਦ ਚਾੜਨਾ ਜਿਸ 'ਚ 50 ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੱਡੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤੀ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਇਸ 2 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਪੀਰੀਅਡ 'ਚ ਆਲਮੋਸਟ ਤੀਸਰੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਇਸ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮੋਦੀ ਦੀ ਆਮਦ ਤੇ ਟਾਮ ਸਲੈਂਟੋਸ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀਰਿੰਗ ਹੋਈ ਫਿਰ ਟਰਬਨ ਦੇ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਿ ਭਾਈ US ਆਰਮਡ ਫੋਰਸਿਸ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦਸਤਾਰ ਨਾਲ ਸਰਵ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਹੋਏ ਔਰ ਉਸ ਹੀਰਿੰਗ 'ਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਔਰ ਦੂਸਰੀਆਂ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਦੇ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਆਏ ਉੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਮਾਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਕਿੰਗਡਮ ਦੀ
ਐਮਬੈਸੀ ਦੇ ਮਿਲਟਰੀ ਅਟੈਸ਼ੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਗੇਡੀਅਰ ਰੈਂਕ ਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਿਪੇਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ। ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਅਹਿਮੀਅਤ ਰੱਖਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਾਹਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਣਗੇ। ਔਰ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਇਕਬਾਲ ਕਰਾਮਤ ਚੀਮਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਆਪਣਾ ਰੁਤਬਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹੋਣਗੇ। ਔਰ ਮੁੱਖ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਦੋਨੋਂ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਾਕਸ ਦੇ ਚੀਫ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੋ ਚੇਅਰ ਨੇ ਪੀਟ ਮੋਨੇਹਨ ਔਰ ਗਰਮੰਡੀ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਗਰਮੰਡੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਫਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਲਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਈਗਰਲੀ ਵੇਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਔਰ ਇਹ 'ਚੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਐਸਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਔਰ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਮਿਡਲ ਈਸਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਸੀਰੀਆ ਔਰ ਇਰਾਕ ਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਅਹਿਮੀਅਤ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਬਣ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਪਿਛਲੇ 32 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਜੂਨ 84 ਦਾ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਫੌਜ ਦਾ ਟੈਂਕਾਂ ਤੋਪਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਹਮਲਾ, ਨਵੰਬਰ 84 ਦੀ ਨਸਲਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਔਰ ਲਗਾਤਾਰਤਾ ਨਾਲ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ 10 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹਜ਼ਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਬੜੇ ਵਿਉਂਤਬੱਧ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਡਿਸਐਪੀਅਰੈਂਸਿਸ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਕਸਪੈਕਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਪੀਰੀਅਡਸ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਫੁੱਲ ਫਲੈਜਡ ਇਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਹੋਏਗੀ, ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਅਕਾਊਂਟੇਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਹੋਏਗੀ ਟੂ ਦਾ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਮਾਰ ਖਪਾ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਾਕਸ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਮੁਬਾਰਕਬਾਦ ਦਿੰਦੇ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
Waiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waiguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Saib Kaur and I am here at the Rayburn House building along with other Sikh members of the community for a genocide briefing with Congressman John Garamendi, Patrick Meehan, Jim Costa. We're very excited that the genocide is being mentioned and the briefing is taking place here on Capitol Hill. We're, as an international community, we are hoping that the genocide will be a Sikh genocide, especially for June 1984 and November 1984, will be mentioned one day in international atrocities and mass atrocities around the world. We're working on it day by day with the officials here and congressmen and other government officials as well. So we're excited to be here and meet with the government officials to see if how we can take a step forward as a community to bring shed light on the June 1984 atrocities with Sikhs back home in Punjab committed by the Indian government. Waiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waiguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Hello, my name is Dr. Sylvester Okere. I'm African Diaspora Leader and I'm the President and CEO of United People for African Congress. And I think what we're gathering here today is very critical, very important. There's a lot of genocide going on around the world, not a specific country, but across the globe. And it is time for us to work together to address it in solidarity. So I'm here to support the vision, and I'm here to work together for us to tackle what has been tackling us across the globe. Thank you.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਮੈਂ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਵਰਜੀਨੀਆ ਮਨਾਸਸ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਹਿੱਲ ਤੇ ਜੋ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਵਾਇਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਆਰ ਹੋਪਿੰਗ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਵਾਇਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਜੋ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਵੇ ਐਂਡ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਵੀ ਵਿਚਾਰਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ ਤੇ someday maybe they will take action against the human rights violation ਜੋ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
And I should also mention that within my office, we have another mandate, which is the mandate of the Special Advisor on the responsibility to protect. He works under my overall guidance, and the responsibility to protect, as you may know, was adopted in 2005 by the world leaders, and it was also as a result of the same failure in Rwanda and Srebrenica. To say, what can we do to prevent in the future crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes to occur? So they decided to adopt that principle. And also, an important element, they added not only to be committed to prevent it, but also to prevent incitement incitement which may lead to atrocity crime. In other words, we, leaders of the world, we commit to no longer allow population to be victims of these type of crimes. And we recognize that we have in the past failed, and from now onward we commit to really protect population. And at the core of those two mandates, we have the protection of population worldwide. And in operational terms, our work has three main elements. First, as the Honorable Congressman reminded us, to alert the United Nations system to a situation where we see an early risk of atrocity crime, particularly when these situations are not already in the spotlight, and collaborating to identify actions that can be taken early on using the full breadth of the United Nations mandate. We work therefore to ensure that identification and protection of vulnerable populations is placed at the center of United Nations policy development. And I report directly to the Secretary General, and as part of his senior management team, I can therefore quickly bring situations of concern to his attention. I work, unfortunately, with more staff in New York, and hopefully within my office we have staff with regional expertise monitoring developments around the world that gives cause concern for to consider whether a situation of risk of genocide or related crimes exists. And in order to do so consistently, the office has developed a framework of analysis, which is this document, which I encourage you to download from our website. This document, before, existed only covering the crime of genocide. But when I took over, I felt that we should be concerned not only about genocide, but also about the other atrocity crimes. So we developed it. It's a tool for prevention. And I'm glad that today it is being used by many member states, regional organizations, to monitor and analyze the situation within their countries and regions. The second element of my work is to advocate within the United Nations, member states, regional organizations for action to prevent atrocity crimes, for action to protect population, and where crimes have been committed, hold those responsible accountable. And I do internally with my United Nations colleagues, and I also do so both using quiet diplomacy and public advocacy. And when I consider that a direct intervention on my part could have an impact, especially in situations where I have serious cause for concern, I conduct country visits, like I did recently in South Sudan, carry out my own assessment, and raise my concern directly and publicly with government and with the Security Council. As I said last week, from 5th to 11th November, I visited South Sudan. And why I went to South Sudan? Because I received worrying reports of an escalating risk of ethnic violence there. What I saw on the ground confirming that the risk is both real and dangerous. The conditions are all in place for a level of violence that could even result in genocide. It could result in genocide if action is not taken to stop it. There is both the motivation, there is the means to carry out genocide in that country. the youngest nation. Flames of hatred are being stopped against population based on their ethnicity. Once ethnic violence is unleashed there, it will be very, very, very difficult to stop it. I will be briefing tomorrow, Thursday, the Security Council on my findings, and I hope I can count also on the support of the United States for action to prevent genocide in South Sudan, given your administration's special interest in the success of this young country. But going back to my role, the third element of my work, which is carried out in cooperation with a range of actors, including our United Nations colleagues, the member states, civil society, is to strengthen prevention and response capacity of these actors through training and technical assistance. But as we have a good understanding today of the risk factors for atrocity crime and the processes that lead to these crimes, we also know what kind of assistance states need so as to prevent these crimes to occur. We also know, unfortunately, that we have limited resources. Although we have developed many partnerships to extend our reach, we work closely with member states, academic institutions, think tanks, and civil society. For instance, here in Washington, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington is one of our partners. And to give you just a brief example of our work in this area, we have developed strong relation with the International Conference of the Great Lakes region of Africa, which, as you know, is the only organization which has adopted a protocol to prevent and punish the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and all forms of discrimination. So we have provided also civil societies in the Middle East who are trying to prevent the fracturing of their societies with support. We have so far done while awaiting a final, let's say, result of the ongoing negotiation regarding Syria. We said, let's not wait the end of the Syria crisis to start engaging the civil society to make sure that the day after the situation is returning to the normalcy, we do not witness retaliatory violent acts from some communities against other communities. At the time, I was very much concerned that there might be revenge against the Alawite, for instance. So it's important to look into that. And for the last 2 years, we have also been working with religious leaders and actors with faith organizations from different regions from around the world on the prevention of incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes. Because I think these influential actors who are the religious leaders can play an important role in fomenting violence and calming down tension, as their words are practiced and listened to. At regional meetings on the 5 continents, religious leaders and groups from all faiths and tendencies have worked together to develop context-specific action plans for the prevention of incitement, including in situations where violence is imminent or ongoing. As a matter of fact, the third of those regional forums took place here in Washington, which was hosted in the premises of the U.S. Institute for Peace, bringing religious leaders who faith from North America, South America, Central America, and I think that was extremely important. And the action plan that resulted from that meeting included a focus on action that religious leaders can take to prevent racism as well as hostility and hatred based on religious identity and particularly Islamophobia. And on 13 December, in a couple of weeks, we will launch the Global Plan of Action known as the FAID Plan of Action and call for support for its implementation. A FAID plan because the first global meeting we had before the regional forum was convened in FAID. We had the Jewish leaders, Muslim, Hindu, all of them were around. And that draft then was circulated in all regions for input, and that is the final, which will be launched on the 13th after we concluded the Asia Pacific Forum next week in Bangkok. So I think for the sake of time, I will simply try to shorten my presentation and by highlighting also an important initiative which was launched by the Secretary General in 2013, named the Human Rights Upfront Initiative. This initiative was launched because of the failure of the United Nations Secretariat in Sri Lanka, because in the eyes of the United Nations, more than 30,000 people were killed, and we didn't do anything. So we assume our responsibility following reports which the Secretary General received after having established a commission of inquiry. I will also say just one word about the accountability for genocide and related crimes. I know this is an issue of concern to you, and in particular I do know that on 14 March this year, Congress passed a resolution recognizing the persecution of Yazidis, Christians, and other religious minorities by ISIS as a genocide. And in my previous position, which the Honorable Congressman reminded us, I was able to really witness firsthand the crime of genocide. So I believe strongly that the importance of pushing accountability for atrocity crimes is key if you want really to prevent the occurrence of this crime. And in addition, of course, to its importance for the victims and their families, we know that the risk of atrocity crime increases when the legacies of past atrocity crimes have not been adequately addressed through individual criminal accountability, reparation, truth-seeking, and reconciliation, as well as comprehensive reform measures in the security and justice sector. Now we are, of course, supporting efforts to hold the perpetrators of to account for atrocity crime committed in other places like Central African Republic, South Sudan, among others. And we are also trying to support efforts to hold at once to account those responsible for serious crimes perpetrated in the context of migration and human trafficking in sub-Saharan and northern parts of Africa. You know that only in the last 7 months, more than 3,000 young people, women, died trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. And we know there's a chain, and that chain of human trafficking, we have to bring it to an end. We have to bring it to an end because today we have even some holders of that chain who are selling the chain, and they make $50 billion a year through this human trafficking, which particularly the children whose organs are being taken. So this is something we are really going to work on because we felt that these people are extremely, migrants and refugees are extremely vulnerable to human trafficking. And on top of that, you have corruption, which is spreading all over. Because even in this human trafficking, we know that there are some government officials, military officials who are involved, who are accomplices of this process. It is easy maybe sometimes to identify those who are directly involved, but we need to catch those who are commending the owners of this chain. This is simply to say once again, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much to the Honorable Costa, and I know all of you are truly committed to make this world a better place. And as I was saying, we are in a world of transition in every single place. We have to seize this opportunity to really make the world a better place. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so very much. During your presentation, my colleague and co-convener of this meeting, Congressman Costa in California, has arrived. I think he has a couple of things he would like to say, or maybe many more than a couple. Jim, thank you so very much for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Garamendi, for co-convening this meeting this afternoon. Truly an issue that is utmost importance to not everybody in this room, but throughout the world, and to be here with this panel, to have Adnan Mahdi, United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. He and I have spoken, and I know of his efforts, together with Dr. Chima, for the Institute of Leadership and Community Development. Matthew Weed, we appreciate your being here as a part of the Congressional Research Service, and we look at those who are participating. This is an issue that sadly has been a part of the human condition for centuries, and so it's fitting and appropriate that we have this conversation today, and we talk about knowing our history throughout the world, how we can determine as leaders to fight to prevent these mass atrocities from continuing to occur. We think about the 21st century and we think about the 20th century. You only have to go down to Independence Avenue here to visit the Holocaust Memorial Museum to see the images and the stories that took the lives of nearly 6 million Jews and 5 million other Europeans who were systematically murdered. What is without a doubt the most widely known genocide in the previous century. In the past year, one of the great leaders of this effort, Elie Wiesel, whose work Night inspired, I hope, all of us to understand that a life of advocacy that he led told the stories of genocide to a global audience. And to the detriment of our collective humanity, the Holocaust, sadly, was hardly the only act of genocide that terrorized the 20th century. Both Congressman Garamendi and I are very familiar with those atrocities that occurred in Russia, in Cambodia, in Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, in India, and Armenia. I don't believe any continent in the world has been spared. I first learned of the Armenian genocide as a young boy, growing up in a place called Fresno, California. We refer to the land of winged Soroyan, where many of the Armenians fled after and during the genocide, their diaspora. And I never forgot the stories of those adults who told of the first genocide of the 20th century, 1.5 million Armenians that were killed by the Ottoman Empire, men and women, children, hundreds of thousands forced into exile, a very dark period in the history of the world. And despite overwhelming documentations by historians and widespread condemnation by the international community, this episode has received, in my opinion, not enough attention or understanding. Photos obviously chronicle the genocide, and the European Union has gone on record acknowledging it, the European Parliament. Unfortunately, even though many of us in the House of Representatives tried to have the Congress go on record, thus far we have fallen short. But that's maybe the first century genocide in the 20th century, but it certainly has not been the last. It includes today in the 21st century. Other communities have been impacted, such as various religious minorities, including but not limited to members of the Sikh religion. Sikhs first moved to California in the beginning of the 20th century. They provided, like immigrants before them and immigrants since, great contributions to our communities as farmers, as professional medical folks, business owners. Unfortunately, they too have suffered their indignity of oppression and violence due to their beliefs. In 1984, thousands of Sikhs were killed as a result of violent uprisings. And on our own shores, after 9/11, we find various communities, whether they be Muslim or whether they be Sikhs, that are targets of racial and arrogant attacks because of their beliefs or because of their appearance. Today, in the 21st century, we see in Syria, and where over 250,000 lives have been lost as a result of the civil war, and in Africa, systematic killings that have taken place in various parts of those countries. And so when we listen to the panel today, and we have people who are involved, such as yourselves, I think it's important that we recognize the dark parts of our history, so that we have an understanding. As famed philosopher and poet Sun Chanya once said, for those who forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. And clearly, as we come together, not only on behalf of the Congress and the leaders that are here, but the United Nations, and the various ethnic communities that are reflected both in this room and those that are not here, it's my hope that the conversation today will try to understand better that when we talk about the goal of preventing genocide, which obviously we convened this meeting for, that we better understand the seeds that are sown that create genocide, that create the opportunities for genocide, excuse me. Genocide involves itself in circumstances of atrocities that are in some cases beyond belief. I've been to Sudan and Africa. I've been to Cuba. I've seen a totally inadequate United Nations peacekeeping force that are attempting to try to prevent and protect these atrocities from occurring to innocent people, innocent women and children. And yet, not enough resources are put there. It's almost like we, in the 21st century, with a 24/7 media cycle, with these devices in which we have instantaneous feed, that we become conditioned in such a way to just kind of say, well, gee, that's just part of people, it's part of man's inhumanity to mankind, and somehow say we don't have a responsibility to try to prevent that or come together to bring resources to prevent it. That's the frustration you have. It's the frustration that John and I have as we attempt to try to come together. So this is an important meeting that Congressman Garamendi has convened. I thank you. I wanted to be a part of it because I have, like many of you, a history with it. I understand it.
I really am looking for ways in which we can better bring together our resources with the United Nations and other multilateral efforts that are involved in Europe and involved in the Middle East and Africa, because this is not something that one nation or one group by themselves can resolve. History, if it teaches anything, teaches us that too often the atrocities of genocide occurred when good people have simply stood by and said, it's not my problem, it's not my challenge. So there we have it. And thank you again, John. And thank the representative from the United Nations, and we will continue to work with you.
Mr. Costa, thank you so very much for your statement, your concern, and for co-chairing this. Let me now turn to Dr. Chima and bring us up to date on your work on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. We are really honored being hosted by yourself, and it clearly shows your commitment to the wider issues about genocide, hate crime, and your office specifically, I would like to thank, has been very helpful. And Mr. Diang, because Mr. Diang is not only the special representative on genocide, he's also the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. He's working on a very sensitive position. So I will be making a presentation today, and most of the people would have to look there because they are just right there. So do you need the pass? Yes, I was sure. Everyone truly. Yeah, you said not in here. All right. We have the microphone. Okay. Okay. Sorry, everyone has to turn that way because, okay, the next one, please. So genocide, where it has come from, most of you would know that it's genocide, which is rape and side killing. I just want to add one thing here though. This word is very important and always very simple, but where I come from is United Kingdom. In our United Kingdom laws, only two people are recognized as rapists. One are the Jews and other are the Sikhs, who have been recognized in the British laws as the rape. So when I move on, it will clear the context further. So the next one, please. So this is Article 2 of the 1948 UN Convention on Genocide and Punishment. How it defines that genocide is an act committed with an intent to destroy whole or in part national, ethnic or racial or religious group as such, and what as such is killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, forcibly transforming children of the group to another group. So this is how United Nations defined the genocide in convention in 1948. Most of the states are signatories and few haven't signed, and few are the states which have submitted the reservation. And it's really great that the United States, although in 1986, it did sign the convention. So what I'm trying to map out today is, despite of having the convention, what are the major issues we are facing within the convention? So that's the next one. So I think, with a little expertise I have in this area, that these are the core issues with the UN Convention on Genocide. The first thing is it excludes the targeted political and social groups. So when you look at the convention itself, it does not include the targeted political and social groups. And looking at the history of the whole convention, there was probably, it is said that there was an underhand deal between the leaders of the world that it wouldn't cover the political and social groups. And it is again, definition is just limited to the direct act against the people. And it excludes the cultural assimilation and prohibition of a particular language or religion. And I think in the world we live, people's identity, their religion is very, very important. And we have in the recent past examples where the majority or the government have tried to culturally assimilate the populations there. So that is not yet included in the charter. Then we have obviously, it is very difficult that you prove that there was an intent to destroy, and you need substantial evidence for that, which sometimes becomes very difficult. Your member states are hesitant to single out other members to intervene, as was the case in Rwanda. I think specifically in the case of Rwanda, we have seen that there were the member states who were hesitant to do that. And the parameters of the convention, few are still very ambiguous and always changing in the UN War Crimes Tribunal, but it still needs a lot of work there. And again, in part, when it says intent to destroy in full or in part, it's difficult sometimes to define what measures and how many deaths equal to a genocide, or whether it's just a number and or whether it's in the way it is conducted. Sometimes genocide are not recognized because the number are small, but genocides are genocide and hence should be recognized. But these are the areas which are not covered at the moment by the UN Charter. So we move to the next one. So I think I would like to clarify that people think that people usually know about the extermination of genocide when it is actually committed. But what we often forget is the genocide is not a standalone process. It doesn't happen overnight, or people are not killed or face atrocity crime all of a sudden. I think it's a whole process of 8 stages. So I will move to those 8 stages very, very quick because we have a short time. So the next one, please. So these are, I think, the first 4 stages, where first people are classified by the people. It is more an us and against them situation. And then they are distinguished by nationality, ethnicity, race, or religion. That's the very first stage, and I think if the alarm is set at that time when people are being classified, that may help preventing the genocide. Then second thing is come to symbolization about people's names, the language they speak, how they dress up, what they wear. So that is obviously symbolization when the genocide is being prepared. Third is obviously the dehumanization process in the preparation of genocide, where one group denies the humanity of another group and makes the victim of group seem they are subhuman or less human than anyone else. And obviously hate propaganda is very much part of this, where while it's being organized, the speeches, the print media and the electronic media is used, and it's a process of dehumanizing to make people understand that someone whom you're going to commit genocide against are less human, or you are more human than them, and they should disappear from the face of earth. Genocide is always an organized crime. It's not that people will just come to the street and will kill another community. It's always organized. In all that cases so far we have seen it's always an organized crime. So the next one, please. So the fifth stage of genocide is the polarization, where extremists drive the group and they hate groups, they broadcast and print and follow. So the next one, yes. And then the laws are passed in certain states to forbid intermarriages or social interaction, and the moderate voices, they are silenced. So that all comes under the polarization. And then it's prepared by identifying the members, by preparing their lists, their demographic details, where they live, how many of them, which areas, which businesses they have. So when that act has happened, so that moves, and the weapons and all sorts of things and extermination camps are established. The second one is the extermination, where hate propaganda and speeches reach on its rise, and dehumanization invokes superiority of one group and inferiority of another group. And that's what happened in the Adolf Hitler days, where he said that the Jews, that the Germans are a superior nation, their language is superior than others, and the rest are not. So that dehumanization process then comes to extermination, and then it leads to all sorts of crimes against humanity. So the eighth one is very, very important. I would like to focus on that, is the denial of genocide. In most of the genocide, we have seen this effectively, that it is always denied. So how it is denied, I've identified a few things here. First thing is deny the evidence. Those who commit the genocide will always deny the evidence. They will always say, oh, it wasn't genocide, it was just a mass killing, or communal rioting, for instance. They will never explain that as a genocide. Rather, they will confuse it with mass killing. They will minimize the statistics always. If, let's say, 25,000 people are killed, they would say they were only 2,000-3,000 people. So they would try to lower the statistics. They will block access to archives and witnesses, that there is no witness presence and nobody can access those witnesses. Interestingly enough, at the moment, there is a committee investigating how Prime Minister Indira Gandhi sought access from the British at that time, when in the 1984. There are 40 documents in our National Archives. They are being, government is trying its best that they stay classified and they should be removed from the British Archives, so there is no what happened at that time. So this is that sort of situation. Then there are attachment truth tellers, the people who will speak the truth. They will disappear faced with all sorts of persecution. And most important is blame on the victim. That, I think, is the worst part of any genocide. The people who have been actually vandalized, victimized, they are blamed. Sometimes they are called militants, sometimes they are called terrorists, sometimes they are called something else, just to blame them, that they really deserve this sort of treatment, rather putting the responsibility on the ones who committed that. And obviously, there is an issue of denial of current interest, avoiding upsetting the peace process. They would say, it was a thing of the past, let's forget about it, let's think about the future. It has happened 20, 25, 30 years ago. So that is the worst denial, when people start saying that, oh, let's just forget about it. In that case, obviously, you are helping the ones who committed the genocide, but it's because this is the want, that you completely forget and move on. And then again, people will again confuse this as a denial by calling it an ethnic cleansing, not a genocide or rioting. Or they would say, only a part of the community disappeared or affected. Many people have survived, so it wasn't a genocide. But whether a community is fully destroyed or partially destroyed, genocide is a genocide. So we move to some of the case studies now. The next one. So I have selected actually 3 of the case studies today. The first one is of the Rohingya Muslims in Burma. I'm sorry I have to use these images. Few of you might be very sensitive to these, but these are the human bodies just burnt, and they are burnt only for one reason, because they were Muslims, nothing else. So they are in Burma for years now, but they were denied the citizenship. Even the people who are born in Myanmar, in that community, will never get a citizenship. They will be called foreign residents, for example, and will face all sorts of persecution. They have been forcefully displaced, and few have decided to go elsewhere and seek refuge. Forced labor, even for the children at the age of 8 years or 9 years, they are put to the forced labor. Religious persecution is very much part of the Amnesty International report and the UN reports, what happened with the Rohingyas. Marriage restriction and birth control. Well, if a Muslim child is born in that area, they don't register their birth. So the biggest problem, Congressman, we have in Myanmar is there is a large number of people who are stateless, because state is not willing to give them citizenship or register them as their birth. So the largest number of stateless people is today in Burma. And there are arbitrary detentions and restrictions on freedom of movement of those people. They can't move from one area to another. And what you see there happens there not once, not twice, I think on a yearly basis, where people are attacked in such a brutal way. So I move to the next one, which is about the ISIS, which is very, very current and very much relevant to the United States. Most of you know, and these skeletons, and these are the human bones, just found from the mass graves. And we don't have the statistics at the moment, but these are the latest. The 72 mass graves have been found so far. 15,000 are the victims at the moment. forceful abduction, 7.5 million IDPs, 4.8 million registered as refugees in the neighboring states. And people are being forcefully converted. And what I like about the United States is, although the European Parliament also recognized the genocide, but it just recognized genocide of Christians. But what I liked about the statement of Secretary John Kerry, it was more comprehensive. It also talked about the Yazidis as well as the Muslims, because what we keep forgetting that the genocide committed by ISIS at the moment is not only against Christians, but against the Yazidis and against the fellow Muslims as well, which clearly exhibits that the people who commit such crimes, they don't have any belief in any faith. They have their own agenda to carry on. Again, Secretary Kerry made a statement, but something needs to be done about it, which I will cover in the last bit. So the next slide. So now we come to the bit about the Sikh community. I selected them as the third case study. The letter on the left is again a classified. It says covering confidential. I could just get the cover bit of it from the British Archive. This is a letter which covers the whole file, the correspondence between the Indian government and the British government prior June 1984, seeking assistance, because it is often said that this was conducted for certain reasons, but it was planned well before 1984. And as of today, as I said, I was talking about the simulation of a community. Indian Constitution does not recognize Sikhs with their identity. The Article 25, subsection B, clearly identified them as Hindus, and that affects further laws. So when we were talking about earlier on about identifying a group, this is how they were identified in the very beginning. And then we have in the Indian archives certain memorandums which instructed the Indian government in the very beginning that the Sikhs should be treated as tribe of criminals. And that wasn't now, it was right in the beginning of that country in 1948, 1950. Such things were said. Then Punjab, where most of the Sikhs are based, it was reorganized, divided into three parts, and their language, when they asked for one language, one state, it was denied. And one thing which should be noted in the Secretary General is that India is not completely yet the signatory of 1948 Convention. They have submitted the reservations on that, and till today that is the situation. And then in 80s, General S.K. Sinha, who was the Deputy Army Chief at that time, he clarified that India had prepared much earlier about an attack on the Golden Temple well before 1984, which clearly exhibited that the preparation was very much there. So we move on to the next one. So some pictures there would illustrate that how it looks like. A lot of people these days just talk about the Sikh genocide in 1984, but I think that it started at that time, it didn't finish, because it continued in the whole after 84 till the 90s. And you can see how people were burned, or how the human flesh is being taken by a dog in a street, and the holy Sikh shrine is very much there. Imagine if this happens with Vatican or Kaaba of Muslims, how would they feel about it, about the destruction of their identity? And then the Indian Constitution has an Article 21 which gives people right to life. But then they introduced 59th Constitutional Amendment through which they suspended the right of life in the state of Punjab, and thousands were detained and killed. There were extrajudicial killings, and there were so many thousands of arrests. But I was looking at the statistics. It's quite amazing to note the people who were arrested by the Indian authorities, only 1% of them were persecuted or proven to be guilty. 99% held in the jails for years for nothing. And till today they have completed their sentences and everything, but they're still detained. So this is the situation. We found the mass cremation sites in India, where thousands were cremated without any notice. And the man who found these was Jaswant Singh Khalra, who was then made disappear, and his body was never found. And today, obviously, there is the highest farmer suicide rate in Punjab, and the drug abuse, because all the Punjab was the breadbasket of India, but it has been denied of the water and so many other things. So that is still continuing. So the last slide now. So this is a bit recognition by the British parliamentarians of the genocide of the Sikhs, because I think there are sensitivities within the Congress and in the US at the moment to use that specific word. But this letter, if you see there, it is from Sabine Hamilton, one of our members, very distinguished members of House of Commons, and he clearly used this very word and urged that this should be recognized as a genocide, and that was about 2 years back. So I've just given a screenshot of his letter he wrote. The last slide now. There are two more, sorry. So I think the wider issue is that 45 genocides and politicides have been committed so far since the UN was there. Over 70 million people are dead, but not all 45 genocides have been recognized since we have some problem in the system. And the main issue is that when it comes to recognition of genocide, the states talk about their sovereignty, and they block on the name of their sovereignty any sort of investigation into genocide, which creates problems. And obviously, I'm sorry to suggest this, I'm the Secretary General, but the UN represents the states and not the people. And as we were discussing, that when you look at your charter, it is we the people of United Nations. So you have to take back to the people, then the state, and till you will concentrate on the states, the problem of the people would not be recognized, and genocide will keep on happening and won't be recognized. So I have made some last one thing. So you know when it was recognized, skip this one and go to the next one, please. So I have made some recommendations here for both the United Nations and for the US. I mean, first thing I do feel is that US should collaborate with the UN agencies and like-minded partners to combat ISIS and to develop programs that strengthen inter and intra-faith tolerance, which you are very much doing at the moment, alleviate the sectarian violence, and encourage respect for religious freedom and associated rights. UN should also investigate and punish for the crimes against humanity programs and war crimes, because word genocide is so sensitive, few people want exclusive right of it. But when you start treating the hate crimes and the crimes against humanity and war crimes as seriously as genocide, then it may make the process much easier. US should support a UN Security Council resolution referring to the prosecution of genocide committed by ISIS to the International Criminal Court. And I recommended that US should support the victims of ISIS genocide to seek relief, protection, humanitarian assistance, and refugee status if necessary. And I do hope the new administration may think that that's appropriate to do. UN should investigate, document, and catalog about the Sikh genocide. This should be investigated by independent investigators under the authority of the UN General Assembly. And the US government should urge the government of India to prosecute the perpetrators of Sikh genocide. And the seventh one and the last one is the United States should conduct a complete review of its foreign policy towards Burma, i.e. Myanmar, and put religious freedom and human rights at the heart of all trade, aid, and diplomatic interactions with Burma. And that I wanted to request.
Thank you very much for a very thorough and provocative and accurate description of genocide in three different areas. Mr. Costa had to return to a meeting that he is working on, and I will also have to go. We've got we're actually we set aside about an hour, but the presentations have been so good and so full that it's taken a little longer. So we are trying to wrap up a lot of business here in this very, very short time. Before I leave, I want to really commend Mr. Deng for your work and the work that the United Nations has done and continues to do. Obviously, Mr. Chinley, you have some ideas about how it can do better and more. I think that, however, there are some issues that make that difficult for Mr. Deng to fully carry out what you would like to see him do, and I would agree we ought to be doing those things. Mr. Matthew Reed from the Congressional Research Service will kind of pull all of these issues together. And Matthew, if you could give us your presentation. I may be able to return. I have an ongoing meeting that I must at least spend a few moments with, so I will try to get back here as quick as I possibly can and towards the wrap-up of this. If I am not here, there may be some questions that will be asked of Mr. Bien and also Mr. Chima and Mr. Reed. If that is okay with you, then maybe there will be some questions that will be asked before I can return. But I just go and wrap up this one meeting and then see where it takes us from there. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. Thank you.
Yes, just quickly, I'll try to talk about in relation to genocide and other atrocity crimes, legislative activities and legislation that exists touching on these issues, and then we quickly we will have some time for questions. If anyone does have questions to that end, you have cards on your chairs. I think you'll bring them if you want to pass them to your side, and we'll get in front of you. First, quickly on the issue of recognition of genocide within the U.S. government, either by Congress or by the executive branch. This is often a very important issue. It's something that members care about. It's important from a policy standpoint, I think, to have statements from the U.S. government on these issues and whether genocide is occurring, whether it meets the standards that are in the convention and also in U.S. law. The question is often who does this? Is it the executive branch? Can Congress have a role? Congress certainly has passed resolutions recognizing genocide in certain situations. Possibly, I was going to say maybe the most effective, but really it was maybe the most interesting action Congress has taken in recent times was to require Secretary Kerry to make a determination on whether genocide was occurring in Iraq with regard to actions by the Islamic State. That was a specific directive in legislation that required the Secretary to make a determination to Congress. That is certainly has been a stumbling block sometimes in terms of genocide. Whether the executive branch is going to make a statement on specifically on using the word genocide and saying whether it has or has not occurred. And so that was certainly a new development in how Congress has been involved in the recognition issue. In terms of other pieces of legislation in effect in U.S. law, a recognition doesn't necessarily trigger anything under U.S. law, any action that needs to be taken by the government. The federal crime of genocide was created in Title 18 of the U.S. Code in 1988 as part of the United States accession to the Genocide Convention. It's still there. It's been amended a few times, but it's still there. There is an office in the Department of Justice that was created in 2009 by Congress that is charged with dealing with violations of human rights and atrocity crimes and crimes related to those crimes. Certainly, Congress has required the Secretary of State and others within the Department of State to take actions to investigate and gather evidence related to genocide and other atrocity crimes. The State Department has a rewards program, and Congress recently amended that provision to include rewards for information given concerning genocide and other crimes, other atrocity crimes. The U.S. Congress has also passed legislation related to assistance, both positive and negative. It limits development assistance and security assistance in some cases to governments that have been found to violate international internationally recognized human rights, including cases where genocide has occurred. It has also passed a number of pieces of legislation that provide direct assistance in certain situations. So the genocide recognized in Cambodia, more recently in Sudan, also HR 5961 introduced in the 114th Congress would be similar, have similar provisions providing assistance to people trying to gather evidence and prosecute people for genocide in Iraq and Syria. In terms of prevention, most of that legislation is regarding punishment. In terms of prevention, there's less legislation. In the executive branch in 2012, the Atrocities Prevention Board was created in the National Security Council. Recently, President Obama promulgated an executive order that made it permanent. It is essentially an interagency group within the NSC that coordinates interagency activities to identify and address atrocity threats, I should say. And seemingly similarly to your office, that the Special Advisor's office, that they are trying to shine light in places where it is not already an active genocide, but instead identify places where there is a high risk, or risk factors are apparent. In terms of, it receives information from, it gives a national intelligence estimate on atrocity threats, receives information from other agencies, and essentially, like I said, coordinates the interagency process, and then the agencies, state, USAID, DOD, Department of Justice, go out and do the things they do in other situations, but with a special emphasis on identifying and addressing the risk factors for genocide. In terms of the APB, the board's prominence, or its kind of it being a centerpiece of what Congress might be looking at, it has a very important mandate. It is permanently enshrined in an executive order, but it is not authorized in law, and it does not have dedicated funding, and it does not have any kind of ability to operationalize. It is an interagency working group made up of representatives from different agencies within the NSC. So it also, the executive order does not refer to any kind of required relationship with Congress. So look at, in terms of the APB, it may be somewhere for Congress to start in terms of moving forward on legislating genocide prevention, legislating programs and offices and what have you with regard to this issue. There is current legislation that's been introduced as 2551 that would actually do this. It would actually authorize the APB in legislation. It would also create a new complex crises fund for programs in this area, and it would create a permanent relationship with the Congress. So this is a way that the Congress can move forward. But I think if you do, just to wrap up, in terms of what Congress's role can be in terms of prevention rather than just in terms of punishment, there are a lot of provisions that already exist that can serve as examples to essentially direct concentrated action and funding for prevention as well as punishment. I think
Great. My name is Gabriel. I'm from Congressman Garamendi's office. Unfortunately, we are very pressed for time, I know, and we don't want to take too much of Mr. Gang's time. So we will just wrap up there. Thank you all very, very much for coming today. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate if we can get a hand for all of our presenters, extremely hard